Can you hear me all right? I think if everyone could take a seat, we're about ready to begin. I'm Robert Bley-Vroman. I'm Interim Chancellor. I know a lot of you. Some of you I don't know. One of the things that I would like to do is to continue the tradition of these campus conversations once a month. So we'll be doing that from now on. In order to give some focus to today's conversation, I wanted to make the topic something that's very important to us, which is the budget situation. I think it's really important for the campus community to have an understanding of where we are. So we need to move beyond just everybody saying we're in a bad budget situation, you know, there isn't any money. We need to be at a place where we in the administration actually have a responsibility to help people understand where we are and not simply cry that we have problems. We do have problems. And so what I'd like to do today with Kathy Cutshaw, with Vice Chancellor for Administration, Finance, and Operations, it's alphabetical. If you want to remember what order they're in, A-F-O, Administration, Finance, and Operations. The other important alphabetical hint is LLL. It is Languages, Linguistics, and Literature, and of course we are in alphabetical order. It would make sense. So what's going to happen today is Kathy and I are going to give a presentation of the big picture of the Manoa budget situation. And then we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. We've been working on this presentation for some time, and some of you have been at other groups where we've tried to do this. One of the ideas is that one way to communicate effectively with the community is not only to hold fora like this, which are really essential, but also to do what Kathy and I have started calling road shows, so that when there's something that we feel people need to understand and where we feel we have an important responsibility to get input from the people who are affected, we will not only give presentations like this, but we will also go out to various groups to try to explain the situation and to get people's feedback and some ideas about how we can move forward. Let me make a couple of general comments. The slides that we'll show have lots and lots of numbers on them, and they're accurate down to individual dollars. But there's a general picture that I think will emerge, and that is that, forgive me for these inaccurate or not completely perfect analogies, but if you were looking at your checking account balance or your bank balance in some form, and you saw that it was going down every month, you would want to understand what was causing that. Was it a bunch of one-time expenses? Was it that your salary had been docked and you didn't know it? Or was it finally that decision to have that fancier cable package was finally coming back to bite you? That's the kind of position. The position that we're in is actually, as we will show you, that our bank account balance, which is our tuition special fund carry forward balance, I think is the correct way to view it, has been declining, and it's been declining rapidly, and it's now at a state where it's really too small. In personal financial planning, you shouldn't have nothing as a cushion. You ought to have a little bit of money in the bank. Some people say you ought to have 6 months living expenses. Some people say you ought to have more. The Board of Regents actually has a policy about what we're supposed to have in the bank. The target is 16%, which is kind of like 2 months. If you think of it that way, a sixth. The minimum is 5%. We are below 5%. Now, if you think about, again, your personal expenses, it's not a good idea to have very little money in the bank and with a very large budget. So that's pretty much the state we're in. So we'll try to explain how we got here and where we are, and talk a little bit about the path forward. And we'd like to have it's especially important that you understand what's happening. But we'd also like to have any useful feedback that we can have, ideas about how to move forward would be very helpful. So let's launch in here. If you need to push that button that says mute on the upper right, or is it already here? Push that. Push it again.
I didn't get training.
No, that should. Let's try it again. There we go. That works. You can be the clicker. Kathy really understands way more than I about the details here. But I figure that if it can be explained in a way that even the chancellor can understand it, that's probably a good thing. So Kathy can back me up if I make some bad mistakes. Here's a general picture. Is there a way to get those off or down? Or can you see this okay? Okay. I may have to read can you read what that says? No. Okay. Well, I can, and so let me try to share it with you. We're going to begin with a couple slides that are sort of historical, that talk about the change in the mix of funding for the university over the past few years. A lot has changed since 2009. And then we're going to talk about some more details about where we are now. So first historical slide compares the source of our funds in 2009 with the source of our funds in 2013. You'll notice that there are more. We used to have, in 2009, we had 760 million. Now we have 230 million. This is income.
841 million.
841 million, sorry. This is not the money in the bank. This is the money that we have. This is our revenue. In 2009, tuition formed 19%. In 2013, tuition is 28%. So one of the important takeaways, if there were a test after this lecture, one of the questions would be, has the proportion of tuition gone up or down, and if so, how much? The next question is why. But so it's gone from 19 to 28%. Appropriations, which is essentially what we get from the legislature, you'll notice that's gone down from 35% to 25%. So this is not an unfamiliar picture in the United States. It so shows a shift from funding of higher education by society as a whole to funding for higher education being provided by the students themselves. So there's a social aspect to this as well. There's a shift from the idea that the society as a whole pays for education to the idea that students pay for education. A very proportion. Large proportion of our income is extramural funds, a feature of the University of Hawaii that distinguishes us from many other institutions of the same general size is that we have a very large extramurally funded research enterprise. One of the reasons, by the way, that the national ranking systems don't work very well for us. We are a very different beast from the people that are normally in those rankings. But I digress. We also have some income from auxiliary service, something for private gifts, and then there's a little sliver for others. But the big picture is the stuff up here. And when people say tuition now covers half of what we do, they're thinking about this half of the pie. Is that clear? I mean, if you think about the whole problem, it's the whole pie, it is not the case that tuition is more than half of it. But if you look at just the comparison of tuition and appropriations, we are now at more than 50% of it paid by tuition. Let's move on. You want to look at this for a second? What we see, this graph has two parts. This goes from 2009 to 2015 here, and from 2014, and this from 2009 to 2014 there, right? This is appropriations, and that is tuition. What you see is, as we know, tuition is falling, and appropriations are going down. Notice a big drop right there. We notice tuition is going up, but notice this difference right there, the one that has 30. That's how much more tuition we have now than we used to have, 30 million. Notice up there, see that 61 million? That's the difference between here and here in appropriations. So what's happened is the shift has been from state funding, from funding from the society as a whole, to students. Student tuition has gone up, state funding has gone down, but state funding has decreased $31 million a year more than tuition funding has gone up. So that's, if there were a test, that would be the answer to one of the questions. So state funding has gone down 61. This is kind of confusing graphic, but there's the point of it. If you subtract 30 from 61, you get 31. Is that kind of clear? You can ask why, but I think the picture is clear. One of the reasons why is that the university, we have a schedule for raising tuition, but frankly, from the university's point of view, and I think probably from all of your point of view, the solution to this problem of that 30 million, I don't want to presuppose the answer. The solution to that problem might be to increase the slope of this thing going up, right? If this were at 167 million, then we would be even. Is that kind of clear? Right, so that this has fallen faster than that's gone up. 30 million a year. So you can ask yourself, you have 30 million a year, less, that's probably a problem. And the answer is yes, it is a problem. Moving on. Now we're getting a whole bunch of figures, and maybe Kathy will need to help me here. This is the tuition revenue. I don't know how much we need to go into this. The key, this is the tuition revenue. It actually reflects that previous slide, doesn't it? The right-hand column.
Right, you wanted me to jump in here for just a minute?
Yeah.
Okay, so when I do this to individual units, I have a couple of points that I like to make. One of them, if you look at FY14, for example, our tuition increase was 5% this past year, which would have grossed us $198 million. We heavily invest back in scholarships and waivers on purpose for the students. So when you take out waivers and you deduct the scholarships, we currently give back 20% of our tuition revenues to scholarship, and a couple of fixed costs. Our net spendable revenue for operations is $135 million. So, do you want me to finish, or I can answer your question?
We're going around that. You're going to have waivers
No, that's a rumor. I'm not at all suggesting cutting waivers, and waivers are a good thing. What I am suggesting when you're looking at the waivers is looking and understanding what the impact is so that we can budget more effectively. In the waiver slides, you'll see that we were off on revenue projections because of waivers. And if they'd been adequately captured, it would have helped plan better in our expenditures. Not suggesting at all cutting waivers.
So I think probably what happens is that phraseology which we use in internal discussions, which is we really need to look at waivers, which means that we hadn't really figured out, in fact we're still figuring out where all of those waivers are and how they go, and we weren't fully taking into account the waivers in our calculations and projections are not in a reliable way. So we're trying to fix that so that we really understand that. But I have not proposed, nor do I know anyone who's proposed eliminating tuition waivers for GAs. It would, that would destroy our system of graduate education.
Actually, I have
Yeah.
another question. If you're at the growth revenue, then that's how much money you got in. Waiver, that means you don't charge people. Why you subtract the waiver when you don't charge?
Well, because we start out with gross tuition, but if we project revenues based on gross tuition, and some of those waivers, we need to understand, are monitorized. GAs are not. If you didn't give a GA a waiver, they wouldn't come here. So that's not foregone revenue. But there are some waivers that we do give out that the student would be here anyway. We need to capture the cost of that foregone revenue.
Is that for realistic planning, like thinking about what's going to happen this year and the following year, that what we call net tuition, which is tuition net of revenues, or net of waivers, the one that goes from 153, 166, 168, 172, that's really real money. Right? And then you deduct from that scholarships, which is 20%. That the 20% is 20% of
20% of net.
Of net. So when you point out that the important line is not so much, well, it's important for our reporting, but what really matters is the money that we actually take in, which is the tuition net of waivers. If you hang out with people who talk about this thing, the line tuition revenue net of waivers is called net, and revenue net of waivers and scholarships and the system assessments is called net. So the money that we actually have is net. That's the money, the money minus the theoretical money that we would have gotten if there weren't the waivers. The gross minus the cost of scholarships and system assessments. Someone is probably going to ask about system assessments. Do you have an answer to that?
Those are off the top for workers' comp, for risk management, for funding our financial system. They're prorated amongst all the campuses for some core support. So the point of this slide wasn't waivers. The point of this slide was our spendable money that we can use for operations, which after we deduct our fixed costs comes up to be $135 million.
Excuse me, for those of us who can't see the slide, could you call out the net under each year?
Yes, we can. This right here. This is the sort of bottom line number, and these are the numbers that were in the bar graphs on the preceding slide. So this is 125,075. This is 132. I don't know how to. I'll round it up off to the nearest thousand. Is that okay? This is 125. This is 133. This is 133, and this is 135. So when I think about it, I think, oh, it's around 130 or so, and that gets us pretty far. We'll come. You want to talk about carry forward balance?
No. So we have 135. million for operating costs. The other point on this slide, program allocations, which is all the base budgets that goes out to all the units, academic units, research units, or administrative units. We currently give them 144 million. We are over allocating in respect to how much our revenues are at this point.
Right. Another point for the quiz, right? The fact that this number, 144,563, is significantly larger than this number, 135, 189, is a problem. Yeah.
Program allocation, does that include salary or just?
Yeah, that includes everything.
So, but this is not the only source of income. You also have G funds. So saying that this number is bigger than the tuition isn't a complete story.
Because I'm only talking about tuition because 100% of our G funds is in personnel, and it is all spent in personnel. So any operating costs that we have, any augmentations that we need to do, the only fund source that can come from is the regular tuition dollars.
So the question, 144 million, is that just operating costs or operation costs?
There are salaries built into that as well. Over time, as we have had budget cuts, programs have moved general fund salaries onto tuition funds to support the salary base.
But your point is good. There is a more complicated, larger picture that also involves general funds. But remembering that first slide with the graph, it is not the case that there are a bunch of increases in general funds that could compensate for this. Yes?
So if I'm reading this correctly, in fiscal year 2012, you were already 2.6 million in the red because of allocations. When you saw after we became chancellor, not after?
2012 started our decline.
Yeah. And we'll
And one of the other slides shows that 2011 we were very healthy.
yeah. So why don't we move on to the question of what caused, well, let's skip that one. And I don't know, maybe we could also skip this one.
Okay.
Well, no, this is an important one because this is the bank account balance, the thing that says adjusted cash balance. The next slide, which will help answer your question, I think implied in your question is what caused this to happen, and was it Chancellor Apple's doing? And the answer is there were a lot of things that caused it to happen, but it wasn't chiefly Chancellor Apple that did it.
Chiefly or not?
Well, let's come back to that. I mean,
What do you mean, chiefly or not?
If you want to wait till the next slide, I can show you line item and we can have that
I
discussion.
mean, let me not get ahead of myself.
Excuse me, there's
Yeah.
one thing on the previous slide that you didn't address, which I think would be important to address, and that is in fiscal year 2013 and 2014, if I read it correctly, the five-year carryovers were very high, which reduced the overall availability of funds quite dramatically. So if you look at 13 and 14, that's 2.6 million, 6 million, is that correct?
In negative, yes.
That's right.
That's correct.
Which is very different from 12 and 11, where we had very healthy five-year carryovers.
That's correct.
That's right.
At some point, you could address why all of a sudden there was this tremendous turn.
The
It's a
next
big-
two
and the
slides
next-
from now has the
In
details
fact,
on that.
let's move quickly because I think people are panting to see the slides about the carry forward balance. But the carry forward balance went down where are we here? This is the adjusted cash balance you can worry about this stuff if you want. These are different ways of calculating things. But this number, if I can return to that intuition that it has something to do with like what your bank balance is like, it's this difference between 99 and 12 that is something we need to think about and try to understand how that happened. And as I said before, this number is not enough. So let's move on. This is an attempt to try to understand what happened to cause the bank balance to decline. And this is what you're asking, I think, about. It's a complicated picture. At the top, Kathy has put recurring expenses. Notice that the $10 million in, so we have 12, 13, 14. Actually, why don't you talk about those?
I'll do this one. So this is an attempt to show things that happened to us or things that we did ourselves to cause the steep decline in carry forward balances. This number, it's important to note, does not add up or foot to a $26 million structural deficit. It's just things that happened to us during these time frame 2012 to 2014. So I divided it up into recurring things that will be with us forever, non-recurring, and some revenue impacts. On the recurring expenditures, the first big hit we had in 2012 was that the UPA base salaries were not restored by the legislative body. Now, when we were budgeting, we assumed that all collective bargaining would be honored, HGEA, civil service, and UPA as well. Civil service and HGEA received their base budgets back, salary budgets. UPA did not. That cost the campus $10 million. Also during this same time frame, 3 years, this is not a stipend increase for GAs, we raised the floor. So the minimum floor for a GA salary went to $17,500. Everyone recognizes this was a good thing. It was very good that we did it. We all supported that. It cost the campus $2 million to do that. We have had also under different leadership, we have invested in faculty salaries and some base budget augmentations to some units. These faculty salaries and augmentations were over and above what their permanent base budgets were. So those were additional augmentations. Salaries might be opportunity hires, it might be spousal hires, it might be an excellent faculty that Nobel Prize winner if we had any of those that were not budgeted for. So these were unbudgeted expenditures that we committed to. Base budget augmentations were things like this $806,000 was to athletics. Sorry, Carl. But we did help their budget by giving them G funds. These are all unbudgeted recurring costs. The biggest thing that happened to us during this time was utility costs. Since 2007, our rate increase only has cost the Manoa campus $15 million. That's not kilowatt increase, that's just rate increase. And the majority of that happened during this time frame. So we had permanent recurring expenditures happen to us in 13 and 14 that resulted in a $13 million additional cost to utilities. I think during that time frame, and I don't know if Steve is here, but I think our kilowatt usage was relatively flat, somewhere around a 5% increase since 2008, I want to say.
It's clear that's a recurring expense, right?
Yeah.
That's, frankly, from my point of view, that's really the big thing. It's utility rate increases. If you want to pick on a single recurring thing that has happened to us, it's the HECO rate increases. Yeah, going on.
Okay, so going down to some non-recurring things that we did. If you recall from a previous slide, 2011, we had a very healthy carry forward balance. System-wide administration thought that carry forward balance was too healthy and that we were at risk of being swept. So the cash investments were made in very good things for our students to lower our balances. Edmondson renovation was one. We invested $16.5 million in cash to pay off the renovation for the undergraduate student labs. We also invested $20.5 million in IT upgrades for the campus. That was wireless everywhere and some voice over IP on the telephone system. One-time non-recurring costs, but they did drive down the $99 million balance that was shown on the previous slide. The other non-recurring things have to do with collective bargaining agreements with UPA and paying back the 5% cut that they took during the 2009-2010 timeframe, I believe.
I can intervene. It's important for people to understand that the university paid for that payback, not the state. Yeah.
And the third category of things that happened to us was on the revenue side. And as I talked about revenue waivers earlier, we were using system-wide waiver revenue projections that did not completely capture the effect of waivers. So we, in 2012, were $5 million, had less revenue than we had projected. The other big impact on the revenue side was we did receive a $7 million cut from the legislative body in FY14. So all of these things together caused our decline in carry forward balances.
Yes, Michelle, I'm sorry.
If I understand your table correctly, so FY 2012 is the year that we overspent.
It's the year we started to overspend.
Well, it's extremely overspent, very close to $8 million.
Well, this is not in context of revenues, excuse me. This is just expenditures. We had other revenues at the same time. So the net effect was more like $2 million, I think, in FY12.
The reason that we are in the deficit is because we overspent in 2012.
Well, there are many, if you want to look at this table and sort of squint at it, I mean, there are some things that are really big and significant. Though, if you wanted to reduce it to a small number of really important things, one is the whole collective bargaining agreement stuff. The UPA restoration and the faculty loan paybacks. That's a big part of this. The other thing is the HECO rate increases. Third thing is the GA increase, which is no one denies was a good thing. And the other is these decisions that we made to spend very significant amounts of money from our cash, 37.9 for those projects in 2012.
If I could answer that question. The point was that Virginia Hinshaw was told, back in 2012, Virginia Hinshaw was told that the university was carrying too much in the way of reserves. So she was told to spend down the reserves. So the $38 million that you're objecting to in 2012 was her response to that directive. But that was made not knowing what was coming down the pike. So that's the reason why the emphasis today is on what followed the 38.
Thank you, Ron.
Shall we move on? Yeah, moving on. We now move on to 2015. Why don't you talk about it?
The point on 2013 is following the methodology that I did on the other slides. We're starting out with gross tuition of $212 million with a 7% tuition increase built in for this fiscal year. We had a decrease in enrollment this year, so this 600 number is too high. I think it's around 550, less students than we had last fall, a year ago fall. So the effective impact of that decrease in students is a realized rate of 4% increase rather than a 7% increase in revenues. Following the same methodology all the way down, assuming no unbudgeted expenditures and assuming that all units are able to spend within their current year allocation as we're asking them, we're still looking at the same $31 million structural problem in Manoa's budget.
So there's a low carry forward balance and a structural problem in the budget. Those two things are not good to have. While the decrease in 600 students, this is not really accurate, but a rule of thumb, a very kind of gross rule of thumb, is that 100 students are worth $1 million. So recruit. One of the answers is recruit. 3,000 students is a lot of dollars, but we're not. Yeah, Bob?
One thing that strikes me in this is that you focused on tuition and students, and yet, as you pointed out in the first slide, the research enterprise is a major part of the university, and yet we only have an effective 12% return of overhead rate. And so it seems to me that you have to factor in the research efforts into the operating costs of the university as well, and that doesn't seem to have occurred in your analysis here.
At least to be fair, we're trying to simplify for the presentation, but it's true that the research enterprise also needs to be considered. Yeah.
You mentioned that recruit, if we double our enrollment in our unit, do we get the corresponding resources?
Currently you don't, but I mean the facetious answer is nah, you don't. And that's actually not, that's true. But I think we do need to move to some kind of allocation methodology that in some way, and for those of you who have thought about this, you know it's not simple to answer the question of how to make allocation methodology in some way sensitive to enrollment. But we are really looking to figure out a way to do that. In fact, I would rather not get into the complexities of that. We do have I've appointed a committee to consider budget process and allocation methodology. I think they'll start working next week with any luck. I see some nods from, you want to complain, you can complain to these two people here. They're on the committee. Thank you.
Yeah,
Not complain. Interesting ideas. There's
Robert, I think it's fair to say we decided in February to make any increase in enrollment, allocate that to the unit, but this year there was no increase in enrollment. So there has in principle been made a decision that if overall tuition income increases as a result of enrollment, it will go out to the units. We just did not have that increase this year.
Thank you.
And we did it, I believe 3 years ago, we did it on a one-time only basis.
Yeah, and it's true, we made that decision in February, but it's sort of a moot point if there are no enrollment increases. Yes?
Is this on? How did you arrive at the 600 student projected decrease? And does it have anything to do with the raise in tuition?
Is Francisco here?
I think that...
Francisco is Vice Chancellor for Students.
Thank you. The decrease in the number of students is a head count that we do on the official day. As I think Kathy said, it's actually closer to 500 than it is to 600. The decrease, I think, can be attributed to a couple of factors. The decrease in the number of high school graduates of the state of Hawaii, West Oahu, because they are recruiting from the same base, and interestingly enough, an increase in the graduation rate. So we're graduating more students, but not filling the class with the same number of students who have graduated.
I was wondering whether the decrease in enrollment had anything to do with the hiring freeze and the cutback in lectures. I mean, we cut back 3 classes, which affected close to 100 students. So, you know, I'm just wondering if that's going to be a factor in this as well.
I mean, if I can, off the top of my head, that would be presuming that the students who were unable to get those particular classes actually dropped out of Manoa as a result. I don't know whether we should look into that. I think that it's unlikely that I'm thinking of myself as a student enrollee. If I had decided to come to Manoa and put my money down and arrange to be here, I don't think the inability to get into one of the classes that I wanted would have probably caused me to change my mind a couple weeks before and abandon that plan. But that's just a guess that it certainly decreased the enrollment in those courses, but it probably didn't significantly affect tuition income. You know, that you could ask about the long term. If this university is a place where students has a reputation like California, where students can't get into the classes that they need, then that certainly has a bad long-term effect. And that's one of the things we have to work hard to prevent in any plan that moves us forward. We have to preserve that ability of students to get the classes they need. Yeah.
Okay, I think given that the trend is not going to reverse in that we're not going to see increased funding from the state, and that tuition is going to be responsible for paying, for more things. And if that's the case, should we think about the fact that now student or the services or the university that's more centered around student make more sense, and I think students have right to demand that as their share of the financial responsibility increases. If that's the case, though I understand that the money that comes as a result of enrollment increase will be given back to the unit, how about the base budgets? The existing base budgets that has been created based on what kind of standard, I don't know, but there's set amount, but things are different right now, right? I mean, all the past, budget practices are changing given the kind of, revenues that we have from different sources. So should we also open up and take a look at how those base budgets work distributed to different units, and then approach it from the perspective of the fact that we have to be more student-centered, and the funding needs to be also allocated to units using that as a principle and philosophy. So I don't know if we are having any conversation about looking at that base budget and the allocation model for that and how it needs changing.
Is this a segue? Let's move into you formulated the questions exactly right. I mean, if you have a situation of an overall shrinking budget, and if you have differing proportions of state funding and student funding, obviously you need to take that into account somehow. And this again is not a simple matter, but I do believe students will certainly express the idea, and I would agree with it, that if they're paying a large proportion of their education, then the educational institution has to try to fulfill their needs.
So this slide you're exactly right. Manoa's budget is a historical based budget. So as a result, all units, academic units, research units, administrative units have a portion of their budget that is G-funded and a portion that's tuition funded. In terms of history, in 1996, we were all a G-funded campus. The state kept all of our tuition and only gave us G-funds. At that time, they passed legislation that said to us, okay, you can have your tuition dollars, and I shall take back an equal amount of, the state would take back an equal amount of G-funds. Your base budget's the same, but you have two colors of money to play with now. At that point in time, 1996, the administration went out to all units and said, I'm going to trade you tuition dollars for the operating expenses that you currently pay on general funds, thus giving all research units, including JAPSON, the Cancer Center, a portion of their base budget in tuition. And that is because general funds are very valuable to us. They come with fringe. So if you put an employee on a general funded salary, 40% is paid, the 40% fringe is paid for by the state. So we don't want to use general funds to pay your copier. We want to use it where we get the biggest bang for the bucks. So that started in 1996, and historically since then, whenever we have received a budget cut, we have done the same methodology. If we had a surplus, or not surplus, if we had revenues that we could give back to the unit and take their G, we would do that and give it back to the state in proportion to the base budget cut that we received. So all units have a portion of their budget which is operating money funded from tuition revenues. So this is a historical adjustment. We do not allocate undergraduate tuition in proportion to teaching. We do not. The committee that the interim chancellor has just formed is going to be charged with looking at a methodology that does relate instruction to the revenues. We still have to consider the operating costs because our utility bills are, for the total campus, all fund sources are up over $40 million.
Yeah.
Can't use G funds to pay that.
If I can just, I know I'm just saying what Kathy said in other words, but if you look at say a college's budget, part of it will be S funds and some tuition funds, and part of it will be state appropriated general funds. That proportion is devised cleverly and strategically by Kathy's office to try to maximize the impact. Right? So it's not, you know, with the theory that if the more people you can put on general funds, the better, because of the fringe benefit advantages. Does that make sense? That is the, maybe I'm being too, Kathy probably said it better than I did. Yes.
Could you tell us about the composition of this committee? They will come up with the allocation formula in a sense.
We should, I think that's available on the website, but see if I can we, anyone remember offhand? Reed, can you help us?
4 vice chancellors, 4 deans, Jabson Dean, Dean of Social Sciences representing Arts and Sciences, Dean of Outreach, Outreach being a major component of solution to the problem, and Dean of CTAR, and then 4 faculty. I believe the chair of the Senate Executive Committee, Ron, who spoke a few minutes ago, the chair of CAB, and then 2 other faculty members, David Ross, former chair of SEC, and David Duffy, who's, I think, representing UHARI, the researchers, and then a representative from ASUH and a representative from GSO, and I don't believe those have been selected yet. Cliff is nodding, they've not. We have,
GSO,
okay, right. I don't know their names.
They both have, I just don't recall the names.
I know there's a GSO person here, perhaps, Michelle, you could perhaps. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And your GSO, and then who's the ASUH? Do we know? Okay, so that's roughly the composition. So, we're going to meet
I
next
think the
week.
head of ASUH is a representative, Stephen. Yeah, I believe he's the representative.
I think this committee is going to do a good job, but they have a tricky task. It's also much easier to develop new budgeting methodologies in a time of increasing revenue than a time of financial straits. So it's just much easier to talk about what are we going to do with all that extra money we get than what are we going to do in this situation. But it is not a committee that's going to make allocations, is that clear? So this is not the committee that's going to decide how much more money the languages, linguistics, and literature gets. So I would love it to do that.
I think you've been trying to ask a question for a while.
Were you trying to ask a question?
I appreciate, thank you for working hard to strategize how the money is spent so that it's most effective. I'm glad we are all appreciative of that. I just would like to reiterate this rising tuition issue for the students. I mean, for the families of Hawaii, I mean, tuition has gone up substantially in the past 5 or more years. It's no longer, as huge a bargain to come to Manoa as it used to be. So we should really be mindful about how these monies are spent and really whether or not the students are getting the services that they are paying for. So with that in mind, I want to know how much effort has been put into controlling our costs. You know, for example, well, obviously, you know, there's the issue of the base budget and whether it's appropriately and fairly allocated, and you know, whether it follows student enrollment. That's one major issue. But how about, for example, trying to negotiate with HECO? I mean, what kind of efforts have been put into trying to reduce those major costs, especially as they're going to be recurring and recapturing some of these crazy expenses?
I'm looking around to find, is Steve Meter here or anyone from the Chancellor's Energy Committee?
Rick is here.
Let me say this is a very good question, and we need to really focus on cost containment. We have, well, Steve, do you want to say something about it? Specifically energy. Energy is really looms large here, as does construction costs and maintenance. So Steve is in charge of planning and facilities.
Yes, thank you, Robert. Electricity costs, as we've seen, rates have been going up. There's also been major efforts to keep the kilowatt hour usage down. We've been adding buildings, but even as we have been, as Kathy mentioned, stabilizing the cost. The idea of negotiating with HECO, that's an interesting point. But I think the best way that we can reduce our energy bills, first off, is to reduce our energy use. That's very first. We're also looking at photovoltaics as ways of offsetting the supply of electricity at a lower cost than what we pay HECO to bring in electricity. So those are a number of ways on the energy side, and developing more energy efficient buildings. And all of our renovations and retrofits include energy efficiency methods as part of them.
This is something we have to put a lot more work into than we are doing now. I think that's absolutely clear. Yeah.
Is Manoa paying for the electric bill for the IT building, which is and also apartment?
All of system buildings this year will be prorated. The cost of utilities will be prorated amongst all the campuses. So prior to this year, Manoa paid 100% of the utility bills for system people that occupied this, sit on this campus. We figured out a methodology where we will pay our share, community colleges will pay their share, Hilo and West Oahu as well.
I understood it's about approximately $5 million just for the IT building. So should we get...
I don't believe that it's that high, no.
Well, anyway, should we get systems to pay us a little bit retroactively?
I didn't hear the last part of should we get system.
Could we get them to give us money retroactively?
Wow, I thought I was doing really good to get them to get money going forward. I wasn't aggressive enough.
I mean, it would be wonderful if we could get them to pay back things retroactively. Typically, that's not very easy to do, but I should say that having all of your voices together, I don't know if we'll ever get retroactive money, but having everybody giving the message at the same time certainly helps. Yeah.
Will you push the system, since we are in such a financial crisis, to help us? Why is the system hiring a new vice president? Why do they have so many vice presidents? In general, the administration, why don't we reduce our administration class to reduce some of these costs?
Yes, it would be good to reduce administration costs. On the question of the staffing of the system office, I don't have a lot to say about this. I want to be honest here. It has been the hiring of the new vice president for administration, for example, has actually made things work a lot better and has helped all of us. So that, whether it was worth it in terms of dollars, I don't know, but when you look at individual administrative costs, I think you have to ask, is it worth it or not? Overall, the administrative costs in comparison to total budget for Manoa are significantly less than you would expect for a university of our size. That is not to say that there are opportunities to make savings. It is also the case that that the kind of big picture causes of this are not going to be solved by getting rid of, we could lower the president's salary by cut it in half or cut my salary in half. That's actually not the solution. There are big forces here, and they have to do with the society's view of education and who's going to pay for it. They have to do with energy costs. They have to do with what it means to be a fairly compensated faculty member. I think those are the issues that really are driving this. Other things are worth doing, and they may be valuable symbolically, but I don't think those are really honestly, I don't think that's going to solve the problem. Yeah.
I think one other big factor that hasn't been mentioned is the athletic program. And I understand that David Lassner has put forward a proposal for the legislature to kick in another $3.5 million. At least that's what the newspaper reported. But as we know, that's a major chunk. It's recurring. And the whole question as to what is going to happen to the size of our program, whether it would not be prudent in such times, perhaps to rethink what we can sustain and what we cannot, I think also ought to be a big part of the debate.
We do need to have that conversation. And, but let me, putting this in context too, it is not suppose we could cut the athletics deficit in half from, what is it, 1.5 million a year or something like that now, to 750,000 a year. That itself is not the solution. I think the larger question that we do need to consider is the role of athletics and how it fits in. I think that my personal view is that athletics has an important role to play in an institution like ours. But, well, this is going to get us far afield, but there are other aspects of the athletics, especially the changing landscape in NCAA football is going to make everything different in 2 years. And it's that we have to confront more than the $1 million deficit. Yeah.
I'd like to have a different point of view about the athletics program. That's a lot of money that's being spent on sports. The reality is that there are many academic units that are suffering. And let me give you just one example. The Academy for Creative Media, its budget for this fiscal year is only $47,000. We have been in existence for 7 years. Our animation students have no lab. All we need is a classroom, and we can't even get that. 1.3 million to the athletics program so they could bring in poor performing teams to play against us so we could win. And you think that that is the more important priority than our students who pay their tuition? They can't even get a lab. So they just, it's like having a football team with no football field to play on. I'm sorry, but I think David Stannard is right when he wrote in the newspaper that UH has perverse priorities.
I think that it's about, we have one more question there. I've already kept you too long, and probably someone else needs this room, but yeah.
Mine is just more of an administrative issue. On the announce at Hawaii.edu, announced this particular campus-wide conversation, your title was listed as Chancellor, and to my understanding, I need to know from you, are you the interim Chancellor or are you the Chancellor?
I'm kind of confused because it means a lot to us, because as far as Imo and Manoa is concerned, we're thinking that there should be a search process for the new chancellor. So could you please give us what is your actual title? Thank you.
Well, there are two questions here. I am the interim chancellor, if that helps. The other question is, what is your title? And the convention we use is that interim is a job status, not a title. So we customarily address interim deans as dean, and that's the way the sort of etiquette works. But my appointment is interim chancellor, and if you would prefer to call me interim chancellor, I would be happy for you to do that. But I think that's what matters. It doesn't matter as much what you call me as what my status is. And my status is I actually don't have a letter appointing me to anything, but the rumor is that I am I am, of course, the interim chancellor. The idea was that I would serve a year, but I think that's, I don't know. What will be, will be. This is what else can I say?
What about the open search? What about a new permanent chancellor?
It is not for me to decide when the university is going to do a search for a new permanent chancellor. You really need to ask the regents and the president about that matter. It certainly would be very inappropriate for me to speculate about searches for permanent chancellors. I don't aspire to be, as you know, I've said this before. This is not a career move for me. I am willing to serve as needed, but I think Manoa needs a permanent chancellor chosen by a search, which is not to say I won't do this job as best I can as long as I'm in this position. I think that's a good, yeah.
Let's bring back to budget. I mean, this is a budget meeting. I understand the faculty hiring freeze is still in place, and I understand that that's one way to address the 30 million deficit. If someone retired and don't replace that position, they have to save some money. And we're willing to do that. I also find out that the cancer center is hiring collectively with 16 new positions. That makes me a little bit wondering who's driving the priority. Transparency is important. Who gets you to hire and who don't get you hired?
A question has been asked about the Cancer Center. It's a good question. It would take more than 30 seconds to answer that question, but I'll give it a try. The Cancer Center is largely funded by cigarette tax special funds and tobacco taxes. To the extent that they will be doing hiring, that will depend on that money. So the principle is that we are not going to use general funds and tuition special funds to fund expansion of the Cancer Center. Cancer Center needs to have its own funding, if I can make it that. It's a complicated question, but we believe that don't object to the existence of the Cancer Center or its being on campus, but it needs to have existence so that it can stand on its own and not be dependent on the finances of the core educational mission of the university. Yeah.
But Director Carbone of the Cancer Center has already expressed and widely circulated the webinar indicating that we are going to deficit by $9 million a year within 2 years. So it's not self-sustainable.
We've been having discussions about how to develop sustainability in the Cancer Center, and I frankly think it would take us too far afield to talk about this now. But I do want to point out that those deficits are deficits in in the tobacco tax special fund, the tobacco settlement special fund, not deficits in the tuition fund or the general fund. So that it's a question of how to manage the tobacco money. Yeah.
I'm wondering if this data will be listed online somewhere. So as far as I know, you have a data site, but not really
Yeah, on my website, it's posted already. It's under our top story that gives those documents. So it's there. I can put it more prominently on the Chancellor's webpage.
what expenses are in each of these categories. Line by line description, I know I'm visual, very helpful.
Thank you very much for coming. I hope that we all left a little bit greater understanding of how we stand.